The broadcast is now starting.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of vBrownBag. Tonight we are going to be continuing with our API series, and I am personally very excited to have Martez Reed this evening because he's going to be talking about using APIs in Puppet. I've been studying up on Puppet, so I have a bunch of questions. Hopefully this isn't all over my head. I'm sure it will be. So with that, we've got a couple of housekeeping items. Get in on the conversation. Join us on @vBrownBag or hashtag vBrownBag. I will be monitoring the Twitters, and I will be also listening to questions from the fielding and listening to questions from the attendees in the audience tonight. So don't be shy about your questions. With that, let me turn the power over to Martez. Mr. Martez, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, you have the power.
All right, as soon as I can find my cursor. All right.
Awesome. I see your screen. I see your code. I see your screen again.
Okay.
Now I see your presentation.
So, yeah, we're going to jump right in. I'm Martez Reed. So we're going to step through some utilizing APIs with Puppet. So just a little bit of background on myself. I am currently a senior DevOps engineer at Slalom Consulting. I can, and doing all things sort of DevOpsy, Jenkins, Puppet, CI/CD, all of those really cool new DevOps things. I can be found on Twitter at GreenReadTech, and then my blog is greenreadtech.com, and of course you can find me on LinkedIn as well, and GitHub, and all those ways to connect. So we're gonna step right into kind of a little background or a thought process around it. Kind of one of the things as I was putting this together, one thing struck to me was, isn't Puppet just for managing servers? And traditionally it really is. You install a Puppet agent on the node and it goes and pulls down the manifest and configures the server as you've declared it. So why would I then want to do APIs with Puppet? So that kind of leads into the sort of the next question: how good is Puppet at handling APIs? So as part of this, preparing for this, I did quite a bit of digging to try and find any resources out there for handling APIs with Puppet. And kind of sad to say that I think Puppet is in a pretty okay state in terms of managing APIs, but I would say they're not the best, and they don't do a great job of it out of the box. It requires some sort of, I guess you'd call it massaging and extending of Puppet in order for you to easily be able to consume APIs. So of course, why would I want to use Puppet for APIs? Kind of one of the common use cases or obvious use cases that jumps out to me would possibly be as part of provisioning an instance or a virtual machine. You would want to possibly run maybe 3 or 4 tasks as part of the initial run, and then maybe trigger an API to register the VM for some reason, and then still come back within that same run to complete several tasks that are dependent upon that API call that you just made. Otherwise, it might be the case of just, why wouldn't you utilize something like a Terraform or something that's more of an orchestration tool that would handle that in a better way? So that's kind of some of the landscape or scope around that. So kind of high level of support in regards to APIs for Puppet, some of the ways that have traditionally been done. There is kind of, I guess you could call a sort of a scaffolding module that exists out there for API calls to make it a little bit easier. It's been a while since that's been updated, so kind of support for that may be very limited. Some of the more ease of use sort of entry level methods are like using exec command with the curl or PowerShell to actually call the API to do what you want it to do. Sort of another step above that would be creating a defined type utilizing an exec command or with curl or PowerShell. kind of the next tier that you start to step up maybe is a defined type that and then maybe an exec command calls a Ruby script. So you're starting to step more towards the pragmatic method that sort of Puppet already has in place that you can actually leverage what Puppet is utilizing from a Ruby standpoint. Then you start to get a little more hardcore with custom providers and sort of extending the types with either an existing SDK that's out there, or if there doesn't have to be an SDK out there, you're basically creating all of the Ruby from scratch. So that's kind of where sort of the beginning and possibly the ultimate end state of a Puppet API consumption would end up being. So usually, I mean, it's the case of starting with that exec command, trying to figure out, make sure it's working, does what you need it to do. And then as you feel more and more comfortable with what Puppet's doing, as well as some knowledge of Ruby to extend it all the way to that sort of custom provider. Some really, really good examples that are out there are the AWS module, the Google Cloud module, the NetScaler module, as well as the Atlassian Bamboo modules. Those all leverage the custom provider utilizing a fairly extensive amount of Ruby that I was able to see from looking at the repos. So that's kind of I guess you could say the gold standard to a degree with REST APIs and Puppet. Sort of the issue with that becomes if you're creating something from scratch, there's definitely a steep learning curve or a pretty difficult path ahead to kind of develop that to certainly the level of some of these modules. So of course, Puppet custom types require a fairly extensive amount of Ruby to be created as part of this process. And so I'm just gonna kind of step through a kind of common example of an API that may be out there. So basically, testapi.com, hitting an API endpoint, in this case, version 2, and then basically in this case, this leads to the next example, which would be a plugin. In this case, we want to enable a plugin, and so our git command is let's check the current state of what the plugin is, whether it's enabled or it's disabled. And then we're gonna leverage a similar put command to actually enable the state as part of this process, or it could be something like disabling the state as part of the inverse process. So kind of some of the things in the example I'm going to step through. Some of the challenges are no direct API, no call by name, and there's no RESTful way to determine the plugin status. Kind of like in our example, that's sort of the ideal for the plugin to query the status. But as I've found out dealing with APIs and sort of real world experience, that unfortunately most API developers don't make it that easy for us that are trying to consume those APIs. And so what this means for us is there are two very different API calls. So let me step to the code example. So actually, so the example being used is vRealize Orchestrator's API. And so what we're actually going to try and do is initially to actually configure the state of the plugin. So of course it's utilizing Swagger, so it gives us a very nice curl command that we could use as part of our Puppet code to configure that process. So I've actually went ahead and created a Puppet module for this, so we can see my Puppet module is Puppet API demo. So let's go ahead and jump to that directory. And so we started creating a VRO plugin. So first, let's jump to the VRO API plugin. So what is being used here is a defined type to create a level of abstraction for us to be able to reutilize the API call. So in this case, it could be I want to enable or disable the PowerShell plugin or a Chef plugin within vRealize Orchestrator. So this allows us to modularize what we're trying to do from an enablement standpoint for the plugin. So we're gonna pull in two parameters. One's gonna be a status parameter, which will pass either, you know what, we're actually going to, let's change that to enable to make it better descriptive. So that way we can set it to true or false, what we want the status of the plugin to be. And so we're going to set the plugin equal to the title. So when we actually call or instantiate the actual resource, the name of the resource will be utilized by our plugin. And so in this case, we're gonna utilize an exec command, which is, to me, a really good starting place to start consuming APIs with Puppet. It's fairly simple. We can utilize a curl command, which we saw was output for us from the Swagger UI, which makes it really simple and pretty easy for us to get started in this process of consuming APIs with Puppet. So our command is curl-s, which is silent. We don't want the full output of the progress. We're going to do a -k, which means we're not going to trust or verify the SSL certificate, because in this case, it's a self-signed certificate. And then we're going to do a post command, because we want to change the state of the plugin. And then we're going to do a set the header, which in this case is going to be JSON. We're going to use the accept of JSON, and then we're going to pass it data. So if we look at our API, it wants us to pass the data in a JSON string of enabled and then whatever our state is going to be. So we're going to, in this case, we're actually escaping the quotation marks. And as we step further over, we're going to pull in which was status, so we're going to change that to enabled, which is our variable that we're going to accept from our defined type. And then we're going to query basically post against the API. And we're going to, let's pull in actually all of these variables. So we're going to use username, password, VRO, username. So the first component, obviously, from what we're seeing, is a data type for the defined type, and then the actual name of the variable that we want. Okay, so we got plugin. So we got all of our variables defined. We're using provider of shell to specify to Puppet what we want. So we've got our defined type. Let's go ahead and save that. And then we're going to modify our init. We're just actually gonna just update this. So we've got our class that we're calling, and then we're calling the defined type, which is the name of our module, or in this case, the class as well, and then the VRO plugin, which was the name of the defined type. So for this example, we're just going to enter in the credentials in plain text Obviously, we would want to use something like a hybrid EML or hybrid EML GPG to actually encrypt those passwords so that they wouldn't be stored in plain text. So of course, utilizing the default password for this VRO appliance. It's a brand new appliance just stood up. And that should be it for our parameters that we want. Yeah, so that should be it. So let's double check that it's configured correctly. Of course, in another example, it would be a case of possibly pulling in these parameters from another source. So we might add the parameters or just pull them directly from Hyra. All right, so let's run our Puppet command. Let me grab the command to run Puppet. So we're not going to spit it out verbosely. Let's see if everything is correct. So we got a syntax error. Line 11. So that's kind of one of the very tricky parts, especially when you're dealing with like the curl command and all the variables, is you're needing to escape all of these different variables and quotation marks as part of the process.
Is that what it usually is, one of the escape characters?
Yeah, I mean that's usually what it is. That's sort of the really difficult part when you start doing some of these exec commands, is that you've got either a variable that you're calling that you want to be interpolated within the curl command, or whether you actually want to pull in the Puppet variable. So that's kind of the big challenge when you start doing some of this deeper level work with Puppet. That's one of the big things I've seen when I've done with either Bash or PowerShell, is you start developing these really, really long one-liners, and you're having to escape these different components of the script, which makes it very, very tricky.
Couple of comments and questions from the guys. I presume you could build a function to do all of the escaping for you, or does that make it too messy?
To me, I would say the step next that you would take past this would be either calling a shell script. And so in essence, we would change the command from this long one-liner, and you would stuff all the content that you needed for your script in the script, and then just call the script from your command.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I would say that's the next level of iteration of something like this.
Joseph Hughes said, escape the final quote after state.
State, final quote after state. That should be the end of it. There's another quotation mark, because I called. Yeah, still getting syntax error. So yeah, this is the very difficult part when you have these long one-liners.
That's fine. That's what vBrownBags are for. We do live demos, fall down halfway through them, pick them back up, brush them off, figure out what happened. We have a really good one with Cody where we actually basically had to refilm the entire thing because it all fell through. We're going fantastic. I don't know about you, but this is going remarkably well. vBrownBag, everybody. Woo! Sorry.
On there.
Yes, Graham, I am going to break into song and dance any minute now. Little jazz hands.
All right, that should be fine. Enable. Let's pull out. Let's pull these out. Oh, lost my outside. Technically, I don't need this. And Puppet still wants to play. So we should be able to escape these outer ones. And enable. All right, compile the catalog. First step in the process.
All right. Go team.
Now it looks like it's hung. Let's see if we can kill it and get something more verbose. Let's do a -D. All right, so of course, right now we can see that Puppet generated the command, the curl command for us. So we were able to pull in all of our variables properly enabled to true, credentials for the VCO admin, the server port, and then the name of our plugin.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, as I've found, that's generally half the challenge when you're developing these exec commands is getting the right syntax to interpolate the variables that you want. Usually, as the process goes, it's a ton of trial and error as you go through the process. Let's see if we can run the extra net curl command by itself. So there's something, I think the name of the plugin is incorrect. Let's try PowerShell. I think what it's actually doing is it's trying to, I think I already have the plugin actually enabled and it wants to re-enable it. So let's set this to false and see if we get a favorable result. So I think the API is just let's try to see what Swagger says. We need to 204 error message from them. The question is, did I actually enable it? Let's try and see. Let me curl the plugins because it's hanging. It's not going to work because it's not a get. And I don't need this data. Let me make sure my IP address is right. That is not.
I was just going, is the IP address right? Wait a minute.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, which would explain why it was hanging.
Yeah.
152, 128. Okay,
Son of a.
So there you go. Helps you put in the right IP address. It's very real world.
Oh, totally. Nice.
Okay,
There we
doesn't
go.
like it, so it tried to, but it doesn't like the post command. Is it a post or is it a put? It is a put. So it's malformed syntax in the request. So let's double check our request with the curl command. Verify header content. So the one thing it might not like is how we escaped everything. Oh, that's because let's verify the name of the plugin. So let's just use something easy like soap. The issue with PowerShell is that it has different names, which is kind of the tricky part. So you would think it's PowerShell all lowercase, or is it camel case? So let's modify our init and change it to soap. Let's run Puppet. And it still didn't like our command. So let's pull the command. Invalid syntax. Let's try to duplicate this command. Right about the API. See if it wants us to escape. Nope, still invalid syntax. Let's grab exactly this command. Yep. Okay. And dash K. Okay, that means it did something. So what it seems like is that it might want us to actually escape the URL. So escape the URL. That's the fun with trying to replicate these commands in Puppet.
Honestly, I prefer these kinds of vBrownBags simply because we get to see all of the issues that you can potentially run into, and this is the kind of live stuff that we see, in the field far more often than the perfectly running demos. So
Yeah.
so this is actually very enlightening for me.
So we can now process the request. So let's verify what our request was.
Graham just said 204 is no content returned.
It is, but unfortunately I got a 400. He doesn't like my request.
Graham.
Even though Puppet thinks it executed the actual command successfully, which it did because it actually made the call. It just wasn't successful. So the last command we just ran compared to what we had. So this is, of course, why I do the -D to actually see what the command was when I ran it. Header content dash type, JSON header, accept application JSON -D. So let's change our double quotes to a single quote. Well, that poses an interesting problem. So what it seems like the problem is that we're using the double quotes for interpolation, and it wants the single quotes. So theoretically, we should be able to do that. Now the question is in practice whether it's actually going to work. My gut feeling is that it will not, but we'll see. And I guess I would be wrong.
Hey, nice.
So I didn't throw any errors. So let's see, what did we set it to? We set it to true. So let's quickly set it. Let's try and pull what the actual current state was. It is, man, I got a lot of curl commands here. Okay, that was the correct one. So we did SOAP. So right now it is currently enabled. So let's see if everything actually worked. And it's not just deceiving us. Let's run Puppet. See if it chokes. So we're looking for.
Yep, nice.
All right, so enabled false. So after much trial and error and debugging, it worked successfully.
Awesome.
Any other questions on it?
Let me double check. Nothing locally. Let me check TweetDeck. We are clear.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, well, I'll say that's about it. The other aspect would be extending it with basically a check condition, as opposed to it constantly running. You would validate, you would grab the current state of what the API is,
Right.
and then if it were what you wanted to, of course, escape or bail out, In this case, might not be the worst thing in the world because in essence it's somewhat idempotent by itself, but certainly not ideal.
Understood. Gotcha. Cool. Well, thank you, Martez. That was fantastic. I appreciate you coming in and doing the demo for us. Let me double check one more time. Well, actually, hold on before I get ahead of myself. Are you done with the demonstration and the presentation?
Yeah, I'm done. Amazingly enough, the live demo actually worked, and debugging it live worked as well.
Fantastic. You didn't plan any of that. That was completely and totally, you planned that whole thing, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were doing.
I absolutely did not. Apparently, I don't know what I'm doing.
Never let them see you sweat. What are you talking about? What's going on here? Fantastic. Okay, so Twitter is clear. The local guys are saying thanks very much for the presentation. Excellent material. A big round of huzzahs for Martez. Cool, sir. Thank you very much for coming on tonight and doing this for us. Joseph is saying thanks. Yes, excellent work. Fantastic.
All right, definitely appreciate it.
All right, Martez. Have a great night. Thanks very much.
All right, you too.
Bye bye.